ceremony that took place a few weeks ago. At this point now, it was the 23rd, right?
23rd of February.
February 23rd, where the House, what's the Economic Matters Committee, had their hearing for all of the beer legislation. Were there other bills that day too, or was it just alcohol day?
No, there were 19 bills in all, Chris, and we were number 19 on the docket.
Okay. So the room was packed by people supporting the craft beer industry, brewery owners. But at least from watching them, it seemed like the vast majority of people that were there to support the brewers. And then for a little,
some very, very well-dressed people on the side, maybe representing out-of-state interests.
Well, I thought Carly was pretty well dressed too.
Some nicer watches were lining the side of the room.
So I think a lot of people, at least from what they've said to me and then things I've seen posted, left feeling deflated or somewhat depressed. However, Len, you were, at least I think you said, cautiously optimistic. Was that the term you used? Or like you didn't seem to feel as defeated as a lot of people did.
Well, first of all, Chris, thanks for having me here. I'm a long-time fan of the Uncapped podcast, first-time guest. So it's just an honor to be here on set with Carly, who is just one of Maryland's most amazing brewers. And she and Brian really do embody what it is we're fighting for with the Reform on Tap effort.
And she must really like you, too, because when I invited her on this time, she didn't say, she didn't ask if I wouldn't be here. She just said yes.
Wow. I wish I had that much stroke in my own household. But no, Chris, there's a lot of noise that day. It was a long day. It was a very emotional day, and it was played against the backdrop of some old-fashioned legislative rivalries that exist between the House of Delegates and the Comptroller. And a lot of times the personal is political, and the political arena bleeds over into the legislative process. But a couple things happened that day that leave me cautiously optimistic that something is going to happen. Now, it may not happen this year. It may not happen in the fashion right off the bat that we would hope, but something is going to happen because we were there for 9 hours. We got there at noon. We finally left sometime around 9:15. And here was what I saw when you strip away all the noise. First, the breadth and the passion of support for reforming Maryland's fundamentally broken beer laws was off the chain. I mean, we had people from all walks of life. We had brewers, we had retailers, local elected officials, economic development officials who are responsible for bringing good-paying jobs and generating economic development and bringing revenue into their communities. And they were there from every corner of our state to say, we have to do something better than we're doing right now to attract and retain Maryland's brewers. The legislature, regardless of how they may feel personally about Peter Francho and the methods he uses to build support for House Bill 518, they cannot ignore that level of support. Politicians that ignore the will of the people tend to become ex-politicians in a hurry. So that was number one. Number two, I saw a lot of lawmakers at the table trying to justify the occurrences of last year when House Bill 1283 was introduced, passed at warp speed, and amended and signed into law. That tells me that they are hearing quite a bit of feedback from their own constituents about what really happened in Annapolis in those final weeks of the 2017 General Assembly. And then with all that happening, the recriminations and the shouting, not one lawmaker offered a substantive objection to what was proposed in House Bill 518. I didn't hear one piece of critique about eliminating the artificial limits on taproom sales and take-home sales and Class 5 and Class 7 production and liberating brewers from this ridiculous franchise law that handcuffs them to their distributors, even ones that are doing a bad job and maybe conducting business in an unethical manner. So I left the room. Like I said, it was a long day, but at day's end, there was no objection to the fundamental cause of fixing fundamentally bad, broken, outdated laws. It leads me to believe that there's some room here to operate. We'll figure out the timing. We'll figure out what that looks like as we move forward this year and into the next year.
And I'm glad you feel that way, because you definitely have a lot of experience.
25 years in town.
in the general legislative arena, so you've been there before. You've seen how things progress. Whereas this is really the first time I've watched any kind of committee meetings or committee hearings at the state level. I'll watch local Frederick County.
They're not all like that. I'll end the suspense for you.
Yeah. So, and I remember that was the first thing I asked you, because I was semi-appalled by how our elected officials were behaving at times, where it really felt like they were trying to put on a show occasionally, and sometimes straight up attacking people. One of those people, Carly, where they definitely did not like your argument. So have you ever seen that before? Where it seems that contentious, that adversarial?
Chris, it's an interesting question. Now, I've seen my share of emotional bill hearings before, but they've tended to be on highly controversial and divisive issues. When we've had debates in the past on the abolition of the death penalty, for instance, or on same-sex marriage.
Yeah, I guess I should even frame it further around as craft beer fans and business owners, we care about this, but in the grand scheme of things, it really is just beer.
I mean, I've seen long and emotional hearings on issues where there is a strong body of opinion on both sides of the issue, where there is a strong pro side and a strong anti side. I've never seen anything like that on an issue where there's overwhelming public consensus that something has to be done to create a fairer and a more equitable environment for Maryland craft brewers. Once you get outside the Economic Matters Committee, there is almost unanimous consensus among just the average public. Forget the local elected officials and the economic development people. Just the average consumer. They understand that this is about local people brewing good beer and providing good times and rebuilding communities. Everybody says we've got to rebuild manufacturing in the state of Maryland. We have to be a state that makes things again. Well, people like Carly and Brian Ogden, they're the manufacturers of the 21st century. They're market savvy. They're producing a product that people love. They're creating a destination for locals and tourists alike. And in so doing, they are participating in the revitalization of the community in which they live and raise a family. We have to be rolling out the red carpet to encourage people like Brian and Carly to stay here in Maryland. The message they're getting from the General Assembly at this point is just the opposite, that we really don't value our small and independent brewers. Fortunately, with 518, they have a chance to make it right and to reset that perception. They need to pass the bill.
So do you get the sense that that 518 has a chance? Or is it just the same as last year, where it's not even worth guessing because everyone thought 1420 last year was going to move forward, and probably that's what would become the basis of where amendments would be added and work off of, instead of an even worse version of 1283 that had first been submitted?
Well, I was told as a kid that God works in mysterious ways. Well, so does the House Economic Matters Committee. So it's impossible for me to really forecast what they're going to do. But here's what I do know: we've been talking to legislators in the days and weeks since that hearing. We waited for some time for tempers to calm, so we could go in and have an honest conversation with folks, or with, at the right decibel level. And even to this day. And it's been 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks since the bill hearing. None of the members of this committee have raised a substantive objection. And Carly, I don't know if you've talked to your lawmakers or not. I don't know if they've expressed any particular frustration or any particular point of opposition. We haven't heard anything.
Well, what we've seen is, at least for myself and our staff have reached out, and definitely, some of our local vendors that kind of rely on us as one of their main clients. I've been, bothering all of them, reach out, and I get emails right back from people, and most of the time it's like, I'm not on that committee, but I support you. When it comes to me, I'll support it. So if anything, we're getting that. And to me, it means that, you know, last year when we emailed, we wouldn't get a response, or we'd get a response in 6 months, but via letter. They know this is important, and they've been hearing from it from probably so many different sides that I just sent out a reminder email 2 days ago, and people emailed within an hour, you know. And then one person actually replied back that they were supporting, you know, a bill that I was like, and I went nuts on my email. He's like, no. He's like, sorry, I got it wrong. I meant I'm supporting 518.
That's
you know,
great.
like,
That's
and
cool.
then I apologized. I'm like, sorry, just so important to so many of us.
I think all of Frederick's representatives
That's right.
have.
Frederick,
have
for
come
sure,
out and-
for sure.
I-
Well, how could you, you know, not support this when you see what it's doing for Frederick County and for the city of Frederick?
And it being the East Coast craft beer capital.
Exactly. Yeah, I think one thing that I picked up from the hearings, well, one was a little bit of shock and awe. I was a little bit surprised, and then two, I took away the testimony from a lot of the public officials, like, you know, the different mayors and different economic development people, as you know, that's someone that clearly is, you know, bipartisan, or sorry, nonpartisan. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Who just sees the benefit for their community. And I took away some of their testimony as some of the strongest of people, you know, I'm not a craft beer restaurant, or I'm not a this, I'm not a that. Like, I see what this is doing for my community and my downtown. And so I thought those were some of the stronger voices to be heard. That I came away, you know, with that initial like, whoa, I didn't know it was going to get so chippy. And I was early in the day, and I got a little bits of it. I think if I would have known it was going, I would have been a little bit more prepped to come in a little back harder on some of the questions I got. But yeah, it definitely, I left with a little bit of shock, but also like, wow, there's some amazing things being said here. And I hope people are listening beyond, you know, just a small group that seemed to have, you know, headphones on and wanted to just rehash nonsense.
Well, I have to tell you that, I mean, Carly's absolutely right. And I'll add that Carly did a phenomenal job. She came in, hit her point strong. She answered some tough questions, and she really represented this industry exceptionally well. So thank you, Carly. And thanks for leaving your business for several hours while you had to come down and endure all that. But getting back to the point of no substantive objection to the provisions of House Bill 518, what it leads me to believe is if the legislature is able to vote on the bill on the merits, if they separate the politics and their campaign contributions and their 20-year relationships with Nick Manis and Steve Wise and those guys, and they just listen to their constituents, listen to their local leaders, and focus on the positive outcomes of a better set of beer laws, they're going to vote to support the Reform on Tap Act. If this bill goes down, we'll know that it had nothing to do with the substance or the merits. It was all based on their relationship with these corporate lobbyists who have had way too much power in Annapolis for way too long. So we'll see.
So that's one thing that has confused me, at least from the retail lobby, where like opposition is attributed to them. However, at least almost everyone, every like restaurant or craft beer retailer in the Frederick area that I've talked to, they don't feel that they're being hurt by brewery tap sales. So I wonder, like, where is that coming from? Is that just lobbyists?
It's a blood oath. I mean, the retailers and the distributors have that is a chain that just can't be broken.
So it doesn't matter what people down further are saying. It's just those two sectors, the retailers and the distributors, they stick together no matter what. Okay.
I mean, I'll just give you one example is what you just mentioned. You talk to the average retailer, and they'll say, "My goodness, of course, a thriving craft beer sector is good for me. If brewers can produce more beer and offer it to more of their customers in their tap rooms, well, of course they're going to come in and shop in my store." And while they're at it, they're going to pick up a nice bottle of wine and a bottle of Prosecco and maybe a bottle of vodka or rum, and that's money coming into my store.
Especially because if one thing craft beer enthusiasts have proven is that we will spend an obscene amount of money on alcohol.
Well, well, Chris, if you remember back in May of last year, we did a poll. We asked 2,500 Maryland consumers, how many of you will restock your fridge by going to your local package store as opposed to going back to the tap room? And 73% said, yes, I'll go and visit my local package store. And then we asked, how many of you will buy something else while you're in there? And 71% said, yes, we will. So that's money coming into the cash register that would not have come. That's foot traffic. That's money that wouldn't have happened were it not for the craft beer industry.
Yeah. And to add to that, it's just not possible to go into a tap room every weekend and fill up your growler. Like, even when I have 3 older brothers, when everyone comes into town, we go to the liquor store, and buy a case of all day IPA and, pick up. It's just you're not buying crowlers of beer to drink all weekend. It's a pain in the rear to come to Attaboy to come get your beer. It's more expensive. And it's
I don't think your marketing person will like that.
No, it's
worth every penny.
It's being a craft beer fan. It's just like a wine fan or any other, high-end alcohol. It is an expensive hobby, and there is that moment where you're like, I have family in town. I need to go get some Union, some cases in Union and some other stuff, and God forbid, sometimes we drink Tecate.
Well, it's funny. Joe Petro from Hair of the Dog Wine and Spirits in Easton, he was one of our panelists testifying in favor of the reform on tap bill. Now, this is probably the best package store on the Midshore. It's my package store, so I'm a little biased. Joe said, a rising tide lifts all boats here. If the brewers can produce more, the retailers will sell more, and guess what? The distributors will distribute more because Union, Flying Dog, Heavy Seas, a lot of the larger brewers, even if they had unlimited self-distribution privileges, or even if they had got rid of the franchise law, they've each said, we're going to keep using distributors because they don't want to be in the trucking business and they don't want to operate a fleet of vans. They value the relationship with the distributors. They just want to have the flexibility to make their own business decisions and act in a way that represents their best interests. And that's part of what we're trying to do here with 518 by replacing that ridiculous franchise law that handcuffs brewers to distributors for 6 months, even if the distributor is acting in bad faith. And we're also giving them the right to unlimited self-distribution. Carly and Brian self-distribute. They should have that choice. If that works for their business model, great. Should they choose to use a distributor, that's fine too. It's called capitalism. I think it's crazy enough that it might just work.
Yeah.
And it's weird. It's working in a lot of other sectors just fine.
Yeah.
And then I would think like one group that if there was this damage being done by brewery taproom sales would be tap houses, like a restaurant or bar that's built completely around providing a lot of options for beer. However, in Frederick, they keep opening and thriving. And Roasthouse Pub provided their support for the 518 that you posted on Facebook. So
Brian Voltaggio from Volt. I'd say it's a pretty good restaurant. I think they have a pretty solid business model, and I think they're going to be around for a while. And Brian came down from his restaurant to testify in favor of the bill. So, and every restaurant you talk to will say, if you get them in an honest environment away from, some hearing room, they'll say that these craft beer brewers create a more vibrant environment. They bring tourists downtown. They attract a millennial crowd with disposable income. They'll go to the tap room, maybe have a couple of beers, sample a flight, and then they'll go on to dinner. And they'll make an evening out of it. More often than not, and I think Carly would have more experience with this than either of us would, but the tap room tends to be their first stop in the evening, certainly not their only stop.
I mean, when my wife and I go out, that's usually we hit a couple breweries, just real quick, and then we go out to dinner and then finish the night.
Yeah, it's all, and especially on Saturdays when people come in from out of town, they've already hit Flying Dog, then they come to us, and we're just lucky we're in Flying Dog's shadow, and then they're, where should we go to eat? And it's pretty cool to be able to say, like, you know, A, B, C, D, all these restaurants have great craft local beer, and there's just quite a few that are, you know, getting really creative with what they're offering, and it's cool to see.
So I do want to take a real quick break to thank one of the great restaurants in Frederick, Roasthouse Pub, for their continued support of the Uncapped podcast. March 27th, they'll have the War Dock Beer Dinner, and they just recently had a taco night with you that I heard was pretty awesome.
Yes, we headed over there, had some tacos, and it was great. You know, we'd been there for lunch, but we'd never been there in the evening. It was very vibrant. Like, it was cool. We obviously, don't tell anyone, we don't get out that much.
And then keep your eyes open. We should be announcing soon the Roasthouse VIPA cards for Uncapped listeners, and you'll be able to get those, I think, at the restaurant or from me directly. So once again, thank you, Roasthouse Pub, for your support for not only this podcast, but also for the craft beer industry in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris, just continuing a thought with the synergy that exists between restaurants and breweries. My wife, and if she sees this, she's going to clobber me for bringing her into this conversation, but she's not a beerhead. Her tastes run along the lines of Chardonnay and Prosecco, so I'll put that out there. First time I took her to the Eastern Shore Brewing Company down in my neck of the woods down in Talbot County. I guess we hadn't communicated well, as some couples just tend to talk in shorthand once they've been together for a long time. I thought I was going to be able to just hang out at the Eastern Shore Brewing Company and hang out with Ace and Lori for the evening. They had great beer. They were actually introducing a new one. They had a nice food truck out there. I thought everything was set. And after the first couple of rounds, she said, okay, well, where are we having dinner? I thought we were just going to get a pulled pork sandwich. I thought this was dinner. And she made it very clear to me that
was not,
regardless of what my intentions were that evening, we were going to go somewhere else. So we went down the street to a wonderful little bistro and had a nice dinner. But they had a great line of craft beers on tap. And honestly, there's no way I would have picked a restaurant that just had the corporate macro brews. So when I go and I look for a restaurant to go, I'm looking at Yelp and I'm looking online, I want to see the beer list. And if they don't have good locally produced Maryland beer on tap, I'm going to walk on by. And I think a lot of consumers are in my boat.
And that's like food trucks. That's another entire industry that I don't think would survive, especially in places like Frederick, if there weren't breweries.
And it's pretty cool to see too that already, a few of them already have their eyes on brick and mortar, and like that's a way to get into, you don't have the budget up here, but you're down here and you work, you get a following, and I've been amazed that those guys work really hard and crank out food, and it's been cool to see. I know there's two of them that are working on a brick and mortar idea. And it's great to see it. It gives people that access to getting into the game at a lower investment. So that's been cool to see.
Well, yeah, and even in Baltimore, Union Brewing just had the Well-Crafted Pizza is joining the Union Collective and their big adult playground, and they'll be going from just being an awesome pizza truck. It was like a 1947 Dodge truck or something like that. To having a brick and mortar location within the collective.
Is there going to be like a kid holding pen area there, or like
maybe a kinder care or something? Will open up.
Maybe when I open my third business, it'll be.
I think there are two spaces still available, so actually that would be the perfect complement, like a pay by the hour daycare.
Right.
When I saw that, I went on Facebook and I asked my wife, can we just live here? I mean, if we have Well-Crafted and Blackwing, all in the same space, can we just pitch it?
Yeah.
Seriously, can we just pop a tent in the parking lot and make that our weekend and summer residence, because they got everything I need to survive.
That's what they should start, just building upwards also, to have a bunch of condominiums above it too, and then it would be the most amazing place ever.
Right? Why wouldn't we all live there? But Chris, that's an amazing story. That when we talk about the craft beer, story for the public. It's not just the jobs they create. It's not just the money they're putting back into the economy and the revenue they're creating. These people are transforming communities. Think about Union Craft, for instance. The space they're in now was an old industrial sign manufacturer. It was abandoned when Adam and Kevin and John took it over and created the Union Craft experience. And now they're going into a 140,000 square foot space that had been a Sears Roebuck distribution facility.
And I'm pretty sure they're not going to go back to needing that.
No. Sears and Roebuck's not coming back through that door anytime soon. It was an abandoned space, and now that's going to be one of the single biggest tourist attractions in the state of Maryland, if not the East Coast. And those success stories are happening all over Maryland.
And Kevin has offered to watch anyone's kids for $20 an hour.
Sweet. Tell Kevin it's a deal. And I do tip generously.
So I don't know if that'll be like within the brew house or where that'll be, but Kevin will watch your kids.
Just tell Kevin that is taxable income.
Make sure to report that, Kevin.
Thanks, Kev.
So I think now would be a good chance to give you the option to actually answer the question without being attacked.
Yes.
About drunk driving and why. I believe it was phrased that it would be irresponsible to allow breweries to sell as much beer through their tap room as they want because it will increase drunk driving.
Yes. To give a little background, it also said that, at Black & Decker and our local bakery, they're not restrict on the amount of drills and bread they can sell. And the point there is that we're not restricting producers in any other industry based on how much they can sell. And I came into the day ready to go with lots of answers and ready with peppy little comebacks. I was not prepared to answer a question about drunk driving. I wish I would have said, actually drunk driving is illegal. That would have just ended. Turns out, it kept coming up over and over and over again, and it's actually illegal no matter what beverage you're drinking. Drunk driving is illegal. It is actually illegal for us to overserve our patrons.
And that's just, I really wish someone that was asked that. But most people were probably the same as you, like weren't thinking I'm going to be.
It seems ridiculous. Like we can sell plastic bottles of Pop-Off. I mean, not we, but like you can buy enough alcohol to take a shower in. I mean, that'd
be an uncomfortable shower.
Yes, it would.
I mean, Carly wasn't prepared to answer that question because it's the most ridiculous question that anybody could possibly ask. I can sit on the bar stool at the Washington Street Pub, 5 minutes from my house, and consume unlimited quantities of beer, wine, and spirits, many of which products have a far higher alcohol content than a craft beer, but there are no restrictions on how much Anheuser-Busch or Diageo can produce. There are no limits on how much their distributors can distribute. There are no limits on how much I can consume at the bar. It's basically up to the server to exercise good judgment, just like the same is the case at Attaboy. Here's what's going on behind the scenes. They have the brewers and distributors are using the services of a highly regarded political consultant. Now, I'm not going to mention any names because I'm not going to bring a staff person into the conversation, but they're using a consultant who is looking for a rationale to perpetuate the status quo, something that's publicly plausible or palatable, and they're trying to weave this public health argument as a way of putting a politically attractive face on old school 1950 style protectionism. It's not authentic. The public's not buying it. And honestly, the legislature looks pretty silly when they try to advance that argument in the face of common sense.
Yeah, because I don't think there's a single brewer alive that's going to advocate for drinking and driving.
No, and it's all of our employees are best certified.
Yeah,
you go through a lot of stuff. And for us, we would do anything in our power to, one, make sure people are safe, and two, this is our livelihood. We're not going to overserve someone because we're held like legally accountable. So I think that there was just a little moment, and then I had, it was later in the day, later in the day got super chippy, and so maybe if it would have been later in the day, like I think Delegate Kramer obviously shouldn't be on a board discussing alcohol when he has personal interests that he's renting property to liquor stores where you're making money from the alcohol industry in general. I actually don't think you should be able to make decisions about alcohol, or you sell your property or whatnot. But that was neither here nor there. But it's after being, basically tried to be this embarrassed scapegoat that you don't drink and drive after you use drills. I just kind of laughed because it was a little bit far-fetched.
Yeah, Ben was the one who was selected to carry the public health argument, and
it was bad.
We've known Ben a long time. I mean, and she's right. He's a landlord for the Montgomery Department of Liquor Control. So if I were him, I probably would have passed and encouraged him to find somebody else to read that script. But I don't make decisions. I don't advise the legislature.
And he also got very emotional about some of the things, and it was a little much. There were a few people that their emotions got a little bit overboard for a hearing on public policy. I thought that I'm keeping it here, and this is my livelihood. Maybe you guys should also keep it here.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say, Chris, on the whole public health argument, we had 8 meetings of the Reform on Tap Task Force. We met in every corner of the state. We had, in addition to those 8 public task force meetings, we had town hall meetings in which members of the public and stakeholders were invited to come and share their perspective with members of the group. And we did that over a course of 6 months. And not once did we hear from any member of the public health community who would step up and say that there is a clear and present danger to public health. So this is a manufacturer concern. It's almost like algebra that we all tried to master when we were in high school, certainly in my case with limited success, where you already have the answer, and now you're trying to go backward and show the work. That's kind of what's happening here. Again, I'll just go back and be optimistic. If they vote, and if they're allowed to vote on this bill, 518, on the merits, on the substance of the bill, the 12-pack, they're gonna vote in favor. If the bill goes down, then it has nothing to do with the merits. It has everything to do with the control that the lobbyists exert over the political process in Annapolis. And that would be a shame, because we're talking about people's livelihoods, we're talking about Maryland's business reputation, and we're really talking about the future of the Maryland economy. Look what happened just right up the road here, where Flying Dog had a $54 million expansion project in the works, so would have created so many new jobs and put so much more money into this region's economy. And they pulled the plug on it this past fall because they can't make it work given the laws that are in place in the state of Maryland right now.
So that was one of the things that, and it went into the overarching of what infuriated me listening to and watching the testimony, was where it wasn't Davis kept saying last year 1283 was bad, so we're just going to roll it back to where it was. So why does that affect Flying Dog? We're going back to where it was good. And he kept giving that refrain, but never letting anyone actually answer the question, or if they did, it would kind of get lost. And at least in their case, I think it's a lot of the uncertainty in the fickle nature that they seem to have, where there isn't going to be this bullseye that you can aim towards, that it's ever changing. So to invest that many millions of dollars when you don't know if that business model is going to be valid in a couple years is dangerous.
And a bank would be crazy to give you that money if they actually, we're not near the limits because we're small, we're still growing, but we would be crazy to invest more to get near it if the thought was that it could go in the wrong direction. And I think that's, they keep saying that no one's near these limits, I don't think anyone actually, and especially the members of his committee, actually follow that argument and believe in it, because it was just like arguing with a teenager. Like, the line of argument was tired. We saw it. You're trying to justify it. At some point, someone should be like, "Can we just move on? Can you stop using that argument?" Because no one's. It's just like he just wanted to justify, and unfortunately, like, some people had 3 minutes, and some people had unlimited microphone time. Like, I could just keep saying the same thing over and over again. I want to be like, yawn, but I didn't.
You did a great job. You really did. But again, I'll go back to the extent that Derek, or the Delegate Davis, felt the need to continuously justify the events of last year as a way of setting the stage for what we're dealing with this year. That just illustrates the extent to which he's heard from people all over the state. So to people who are watching us right now, don't ever think that your voice doesn't matter. Don't ever think that your legislators aren't listening and that they don't care. That's not to say they're always going to vote the right way, because sometimes these guys feel they're going to take a calculated risk. They'll go with the bucks over the bodies, as they say in the political game. But don't ever think that they're not listening, because what I saw on February 23rd were members of a committee that had been a little bit shell-shocked by the volume of the public reaction to what happened last year.
Yeah, that would be my next thing that I was most surprised by, was how many times they brought up paraphrasing that their feelings had been hurt by things that people were saying. That just seemed so weird.
I really wish that was the other thing that I wanted to stay, but we had to stay. I only had a small amount of time. It's like, people of my generation and younger, you're not gonna hear our voice through campaign donations. Like, that's just not, that's not younger people. You're gonna hear it through getting loud on social media. This is how younger people communicate. And when you're not even on social media, and I'm not like a Facebook check-in every moment, look, I just walked my dog and ran a marathon.
Just every once in a while to make a crazy reply.
Well, yeah. Now I'm definitely on social media more, but this is how young people can communicate, organize, and make stuff happen. And to not even be on there or be all up in arms that people are angry at you, this is unfortunately or fortunately, 2018. And I don't think it's going anywhere. And so I had said, I mistakenly said social media suicide, and it literally, you could just see them like cringe, like, ah! But when you've been on, been an elected official since the 80s, I can imagine it is scary to now see constant feedback. Like, I do understand that. But you got to get a thicker skin and understand that, like, that's how people communicate, and that's how you can rally people.
I'm not, I know what they said, but there may be a little bit of rhetorical sleight of hand with the members of the committee, because on the one hand, each of them made a point of saying, I don't follow this Facebook or Twitter or Tweeter.
But I've seen it all.
But they had every single post that I've made in the last 6 months, because right after, I think it was Talmadge Branch who said, I don't follow Facebook, but on December 31st at 10:48, you said this. I'm like, I thought you, Talmadge, I thought you weren't on Facebook.
Someone is on some of their campaigns is actively like untagging themselves in all my posts, because I'm like, I just tagged you, and they'll untag. So they're paying attention, and I think I think that as we, as elected officials turn over, and you get more people that are younger, and it has nothing to do with the age, but the action and the way people now feel, especially you see like high school kids now. Today is a great example of people walking out, like high school kids and young kids are getting involved, and they're finding ways to be active and get their voices heard. And I think to ignore social media is a stupid move on their point. And they're politicians. They need to get some thicker skin.
Now, I will say that I've said it repeatedly, that people should be respectful, though. And
that is true.
The threats and the personal attacks, and that's not the best way to convey your opinion and what you're advocating for.
That is totally true. That is true. But when you're just clearly stating the facts of you've received money from Belgian interests, that's just a fact, and you don't want that on your social, like, that, campaign financing is a hot button issue that will become, I think, even more so in the next elections. That, if you're accepting money from certain donors, you have to be willing to answer the questions.
So that was a question. You had said the power of lobbyists. Does that, and what wields that power? Where does that power come from? Is that from
money?
Okay, that's
money.
what. But it's not from they're the person in that legislator's ear. It's the donations and from special interests and.
Well, the cause is the money, and the effect is they're the person who's
That
in the
gets to be in
legislator's
your-
ear.
okay.
Right. That comes with a cover charge. So no, whenever a politician says it's about it's about the kids, it's about the health of the community, it's about public health, follow the money. But it has to change, and I've told several people this in the days since the bill hearing, because I think you're right. I think there was a sense of an element of surprise. Maybe folks were deflated by the volume of the opposition on the committee, some of the tactics that were employed that day. And what I try to remind people is this is going to happen because progress always happens. There's not a politician in America that was powerful enough to save the rotary phone,
the buggy whip,
the Model T, the washboard. Progress always wins in the end. Now, we can't always pinpoint the timing of it, but progress always wins over stagnation. And what we have now in Annapolis is a stagnant, broken system. It was conceived in Prohibition. It's been sustained by very wealthy, moneyed interests, but it's outdated. It no longer serves, if it ever did, it certainly no longer serves a constructive purpose. And it's now getting in the way of economic progress and our quality of life, and it's going to go. So keep it up. Keep calling your delegates and senators. Keep showing up at our happy hours to show that there is so much energy and vibrance around this cause, because it is making an impact. Even if you think it isn't, it is making a difference, I assure you.
That's the only way dollars can be ignored.
One of the first people I worked for in this business, and I won't mention his name, but he said, and it was when I was working on a political campaign, he said, if you're ever forced into a choice between the bodies and the bucks, go with the bodies every time, because you can always find your money elsewhere, but your voters are your voters.
Mm-hmm.
So going into this, I decided I didn't want to be negative towards representatives, but it's becoming more and more difficult as I think of things that were said. And one of the other shocking moments too.
Up now.
Yeah, well, because there were several times where, as I'm watching it, I was just angry. And Graham got several of those text messages where, can you believe that? I sent a quote of, and I'll get to one of them. I wasn't going to bring it up, but now I'm mad about it again. But where there was the one gentleman from, I can't remember his name, but he was from the campaign reform group, and he brought up the amount of money donated to different representatives. And then the hissy fit that the one guy, and I can't remember which representative was, he threw a temper tantrum about being accused of what donations would cause him to do. But why would someone give you a donation if you're not going to vote in the way?
Well, his response was quite frankly embarrassing for him. He took it
so personal.
And that's
and usually that's someone who's a guilty conscience.
That's how I react to my husband when he says something true to me that I want, how could you say that? And the next day I'm like, maybe that was right. He went so far overboard. It was almost funny. It was a little bit of a drama king moment. And then for Delegate Davis to just be like, I take all the money. That's fine.
Look, and
I'm used to it.
It's not inherently wrong to take campaign contributions. And
well, I mean, in the world we live in, you have to.
Yeah,
you have to.
It's the lubricant that drives our process, unfortunately, and money is all too bountiful in this system that we have, but it's the one we've got. And I'll just say right now, Peter has accepted a lot of contributions over his career from from distributors and retailers. And that was discussed during that day-long hearing.
Yeah.
And what I would say is they're buying into his agenda. He's not buying into theirs. And what Peter has definitely shown, I don't think you can accuse him of anything different. Regardless of who has made contributions to him in the past, he will break with his supporters, and he will break with the leadership of his own political party when he feels the public interest hangs in the balance. Obviously, what he's done in the past year has put him at odds. I don't know if it's irreparable, or hopefully it's not, but it's pretty frosty right now with the leadership of the Maryland distribution and retail industries. And we're just going to have to live with it, because what we're fighting for right now with the Reform on Tap Act of 2018, it's the right thing to do. And every time we hear the stories of people like Brian and Carly who are raising a family and investing their life savings to create a business, and Johnny and Tommy Noor down in Salisbury are repurposing an old abandoned ice house on Route 13 to create Evolution Craft Brewing, and seeing the way people like Julie Verratti from Denizens give back to the community every chance she gets. That's just a reminder of who it is and what it is that we're fighting for here, and it makes us more energized than ever before.
And I would even say, I would doubt there are any distributors listening, but the first person to jump on board and support their local craft brew, like these are the businesses that you've partnered with. Let's just make them successful. I think they're missing a huge business opportunity by not saying, you know what, I'm going to have equal-sided contracts. I'm going to make sure I do a good job, and these are based on how well we're doing in our success metrics that we set up. And the first one that does that, I mean, I think they're missing a business opportunity by not saying union is expanding, and I'm going to run with that and make them the biggest guy on the East Coast, because that's where the regional expansion is really where it's at, not attaboy mom and pop kind of stuff. So, but yeah, I think that they're missing the fact that like the country's moving forward without Maryland. So
yeah,
like see what they're doing in North Carolina, see what they're doing in Oregon, Virginia. I better get on board.
And that one of the sometimes overt, sometimes very direct, they made accusations about the level of enforcement that the comptroller was putting on to the alcohol industries.
Yeah, I think our field enforcement guy, Jeff Kelly, fought back pretty hard on that. There are very few things that get us worked up, because we've been in this business a long time and we've seen it all. But what happened there was you had a member of the House of Delegates who honestly didn't know what he was talking about, and he was questioning the integrity of sworn law enforcement officers. And, he was treading on thin ice there.
Yeah, so like what I was going to say is that I have seen breweries online take heat for policies that they have in their tap rooms or at the brewery that are, and they cite because that is what the comptroller's enforcement person told them that it needs to be. And like they easily, if there wasn't enforcement, could just do what people were saying so that they wouldn't take that heat. But so there's obviously examples of enforcement happening, which, and as you said, like they are questioning the integrity of a.
Yeah, Chris, you could come down in our basement. I'd invite, Carly, I'd invite you to do the same. Come down into the basement of the Goldstein Treasury Building someday, and you would see an entire warehouse filled with contraband alcohol, where smugglers are bringing it into the state, untaxed, unstamped, to sell it on the black market, and more often than not, put these products in the hands of kids. And the Maryland Comptroller's Office, for decades, and it goes well beyond, or right well before Peter Francho took office, partners with our state and local law enforcement agencies to get those products out of the trunks of those cars and to keep those things out of the hands of kids. We worked with the distributors and retailers to make sure that powdered alcohol, which is kind of another way of putting a date rape drug on the market, we kept those off of supermarket shelves. We did the same thing with caffeinated alcohol beverages a few years ago after it was causing kids to get behind the wheel, not knowing the effects of the drinks. and we were seeing fatalities, and we got those off the street. So we have a national reputation of being the strongest and the most effective law enforcement agency of alcohol beverages in the country. And so for Warren to say that just to try to score some political points, it was pretty disappointing.
And I thought, I'm sorry, I forgot, your enforcement
Jeff
officer,
Kelly, good guy.
he did have a very good response and was able to show emotion without being petty.
Yeah.
Like actually gave facts and
he's one of the best. He really is.
And then one of the moments that got me the most angry was the quote, "I'll put the gun back into the holster and resist the urge." I was just taken aback by how tone deaf and let's say pathetic of a comment that was, because he couldn't handle a millennial, Tim Scouten, giving them a run, giving good arguments.
I don't even know Tim that well, but
Tim's
he's a little
great.
punk.
He's a wild man. I love that guy. Tim, if you're watching, I love you, man.
And I think he did a great job, because it's definitely his personality. He needled until the point, but like that was just so tone deaf. It was unbelievable.
Tone deaf for the moment, and then
just
maybe
in general.
Yeah, well, especially for that day, that week in time, I think is incredibly tone deaf. But I also think that, I'm chalking it up to it was a long, long day, and that was a terrible thing to say. There's just not a defense for that.
Yeah, long day. We all have to be careful in this business.
So then we focused mainly on what we want to happen, 518. Do you think 1052 has any traction, or do you think that there's been enough outcry that
I don't think 1052 ever had any traction. Honestly, I think it was a statement. I think it was a message that if you don't like what we give you, we could take it away. And I think the spirit behind 1052 was really troubling. And what it was the legislature treating the Maryland craft beer industry like contentious children who complained about their dessert, and so they were going to take the dessert away. And we shouldn't be treating we shouldn't be treating people like that. It's not okay, because people like Brian and Carly Ogden, they pay my salary. They pay Peter Francho's salary, and they paid for that hearing room. They pay the salaries of each of those delegates and their respective staff members who are sitting around the table that day. They're not wayward children. They are our bosses. They're the taxpayers who allow us to pay for better schools, safer communities, a cleaner bay, and everything else that we care about. And we need to be responsive to these folks. And so more than the substance of 1052, because I don't think it ever really had a chance, I think the predicate behind it just reflected a sense of disconnected arrogance. And it just shows that we really do need fundamental change in our political system.
And I actually don't think that they thought when they put that together, I thought they would be like, we'll get them, we'll show them. I don't think they thought they would get such a reaction. And I think whoever was giving them information and suggesting they should do this really was giving them poor information. That was poor political play. I think some things could have maybe, evolved and not, but that really was a bad play, in my opinion.
Tim is watching, and he'll accept being called a punk anytime.
The man's a legend. I love him.
And I really hope that someday there is a Gunda brewery to go to.
I think that there will be no doubt there will be one.
They should make it in. They should come to Frederick to open it, but
yeah,
anywhere is fine.
Come to the east side.
But I think it's very telling when you create a bill that is punitive to an entire industry, except you carve out for one particular brewery to benefit from it, and then that brewery makes a public statement saying, whoa, we don't support this.
Right. Not us. We had nothing to do with this.
And And I would think from a company the size of Diageo, it's like they're not going to make a statement like that lightly. Like, it's not that they've put a lot of thought into.
I really feel bad for Diageo. I mean, it's a wonderful thing that's happening in Baltimore County. They've chosen to invest in that relay facility and create something very meaningful and very good for not only Baltimore County but for the region. And people are going to come here, and they're going to spend money here to be a participant in that experience. And it's unfortunate that that whole thing got tied up in
just a mess.
This mess, that what 1283, and then everything that's followed, because it really did cast an unwelcome pall over what should be a wonderful, good news event for the entire state. So I feel really bad about that.
Yeah, even for, I think it's painted them in a bad light within the industry to some. Even though I truly believe Guinness being there will be amazing for the craft beer industry in Maryland. And most of the people who go there are going to then just straight down the street go to Heavy Seas, and then Baltimore's not that far away where you can go to Union, Waverly, everyone else that's there, and then Columbia's close by. So there are a lot of craft brewers that are going to benefit from Guinness being there.
I think what a lot of people have a problem with is the legislature acted only when they had an opportunity to do something for this multinational firm that was coming in to spend big dollars, when if it hadn't been for Guinness, if this had merely been a matter of helping small local independent craft brewers, we wouldn't have gotten to first base. I think that's what people have a real problem with.
Yeah, but in that instance, so it's kind of misguided to
I agree with that.
Blame Guinness for it. It's really the lobbyists and legislators.
I'll be the loudmouth kind of little jerky pie, but
jerky pie, I love that.
They could jump in and help out a little more.
I mean, they have to some extent, I believe.
They could be, just as some of the, it's difficult for the bigger guys because they have national interests, and it's a much more complicated assessment of everything. You have to play nice on all sides, but I'll leave it at that.
But I believe, from what I understand, they did help a lot last year.
I think things got very confusing and very muddied at the end. I think things were happening so quickly, and things were happening in the privacy of a back room, that messages just got muddied. And we'll leave it at that.
Okay. And then there's also there was the bill to remove the comptroller's office from enforcement, which really, you can't see that from any other way as trying to slap Peter on the wrist.
I mean, someone is actually getting paid by somebody to give this type of political advice. I guess it's good work if you can get it.
But you know what? I thought that the bill itself, as ridiculous as it is, if you want to set up a task force to study how well these guys are doing their jobs, great, because from what I see, they're very transparent and doing a great job. And that's the one thing I saw of, fine, if you guys think that's what's needed from our taxpayer dollars, you want to spend money on that, brutal, I don't think it's a good use of your time. But yeah, and then also, I think in that bill, they also were going to study drunk driving and whatnot. Let's find out where the drunk driving is happening. Let's open this up. Where are people buying their alcohol? I think it would have been a funny of really, if that's what you two are going for, go get them. Even just those two together, putting together a bill. One was a pro-smoking in public places. One's anti-smoking in public places. It was just this marriage of a funny little duo that are way off in left field. And I can tell you, I've made some errors on our tax returns, and I get an email just that week. Hey, and it's maybe over a couple $, a couple cents a barrel here, but I get an email right away, and I've got to fix it. And so if they're not doing a good job, then let's study it.
When every new employee comes into the office, the comptroller greets them, and he says the same thing. You're here to deliver the 3 R's. You're here to respect the taxpayer. You're here to be responsive to the taxpayer, and you're here to deliver results for the taxpayer. Now, it doesn't always mean you're going to give them what they want, but you're going to give them an answer. You're going to give it to them with alacrity, and to the extent that we can be of help and help them achieve a more positive outcome, obviously within the framework of the law, you're going to do it. And if those aren't the values that you work by, you may want to go work someplace else.
Yeah, someone recently told me the next time that I had the comptroller on or I see him somewhere to thank him because they got their Maryland state return back in 2 days.
Oh.
That's our average. Our average, even in this age of tax fraud, where we have to double and triple check and make sure that there's no possibility of a fraudulent return. Our average is 2.2 business days, which we believe is the quickest turnaround time in the country.
I can't imagine it would be much faster.
Yeah.
But you still do not turn your TPS reports in on time.
We're going to have to work on that. I understand we have a new cover sheet now. So I've already met with Bill Lumberg on that.
My favorite was they was looking at a graph without seeing the key on the graph, and then it was like a Adam Sandler moment, just like, that is okay. Keep moving. Like, I gotcha. Yeah. This graph shows that you're only serving this. Nope.
It was quite a day for all of us. It really was. But
the TPS report comment was just such a perfectly timed, great moment of levity.
Thank you. Anytime you can work in an office space or an old school reference, you're having a good day, no matter how long it is.
All right, so I think we've covered just about everything, probably, unless you guys have anything more you want to say.
I don't think so.
Other than to reiterate, it's not over.
Not over by a long shot.
You should still, if you haven't already, contact your legislators and be polite.
Be polite. It's not about beer. This is about jobs. This is about Maryland businesses, and I think that's at the heart of it.
I couldn't say anything better. She's exactly right. Yes to 518, good jobs, stronger economy, revitalized communities. That's what it's all about, and that's what we're here for.
And so, in a breakdown for what the next steps are, so the committee will give a favorable or a negative response to all of the bills. Anything that's given favorable will then cross over to the Senate.
Well, then then it
goes to the House to vote.
Goes to the full committee. Goes to the full House for a floor vote, and then it goes over to the Senate. And
then that's when they work in their changes, and then it goes back.
So the committee itself can't make amendments?
Yes.
They can't?
Yeah, they can.
Okay.
Yeah, that was one of the big things last year where 1283 had a couple things in it, but then when it came out of committee, it had been amended so that it would decimate the industry, basically.
Yeah, you can amend the bill in its entirety. You can just basically redline everything after the first whereas. And so, our concern is that it's the possibility that they could, give us a couple of pieces of low-hanging fruit, but not really address the core issues of these artificially restrictive limits or this fundamentally unfair franchise law or the prohibition on unlimited self-distribution. And then that basically freezes the clock where they say, well, we gave you a couple things last year. Let's give it, 4 or 5 years to make it work. That's why we're really pushing for an intellectually honest vote on this bill. Obviously, the legislature has the right to amend. If they see an opportunity to make the bill better, they should do so. But let's take a vote on all these provisions. 4 or 5 years, Maryland beer will be left behind. Yeah. Every state is moving forward, and we're going to be the laughing stock. Well, we are currently, but if this just continues, and I think also from the brewer standpoint, we realize what can happen if we're not active and mobilizing, and we're not going home. When is crossover day? It's this week. Okay, so it has to come out of committee, have its votes before crossover day to go into the Senate. It certainly becomes a lot. I mean, there's always things you can do with late bills, but yes, it certainly becomes a lot harder if you don't hit your crossover deadline. Okay.
right, well, thank you so much, both of you, for coming in and participating in today's discussion.
Chris, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
This is really cool. Thanks.
And thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. Cheers.
Woohoo. Contact your local legislator.
Respectfully.
Yes.
Yes.
Be nice.